probably know the words. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. This prayer is used today by millions who are in recovery and hangs on thousands of walls as a beautiful plaque. Today, I want to explore this prayer for the spiritual and psychological truth it provides. Frankly, all of us need the skill of acceptance to navigate these difficult days. The prayer is traced to a well-known preacher and theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, an extraordinary Lutheran pastor, professor, and social activist in the mid-20th century. His teachings tried to find a practical balance between the ideals of Christian ethics and the evils of our unjust world. During the tumultuous world events of the 1930s and 40s, when it seemed like all the demons of hell had been released upon the world, with revolutions, wars, genocides, and economic depressions, Niebuhr composed or adapted this prayer and began to use it in his lectures and his sermons. Hi, I'm Larry Payne, your host of Tracks for the Journey. I appreciate you tuning in to this episode about acceptance as we explore what it means for us to adapt this skill into our lives and live with greater well-being. One version of the prayer that Niebuhr shared is a little different than the one that we hear today. It begins like this: God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed. Now, in that first phrase, we're challenged to accept with serenity the things that can't be changed. Now, that is a showstopper. The idea of being powerless and unable to change things galls us. We don't like to be told that there are things in this world that we can't change. In fact, the Army had a motto: the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer. And now that's the way mankind wants to live. And truly, we've rebuilt the earth, we've conquered the skies, we've tunneled under mountains, we've abolished some diseases. So surely the last 500 years have proven that Niebuhr's prayer is unneeded. But our lives inflict a cruel blow as the years go by because we discover there are lots of things that we cannot change. We may try until our souls and minds are bruised and exhausted, then finally we admit that we're whipped. There are things that just won't change. So let's be real and let's be wise. What are those things we cannot change? We should face them squarely. And let me suggest 4 unchangeables that are the facets of life each of us will encounter. We can't change the past. The rushing river of time removes instantly our ability to change the word we just spoke, the button we pushed, or the judgment that we rendered so quickly. Real life has no rewind button, and time flows like a river past us, and we cannot step into the same river ever again. And yet we often agonize over the past, saying, "What if?" King David prayed with deep sorrow, "For I know my transgressions and my sins are ever before me." No matter how much he repented, nothing could be changed. We can't change the choices of others either. We're surrounded by free human beings who determined what they wanted to do, and we often try to make their choices. We hint and we demand and we whine and persuade and nag and pressure. How many words do we have in our language that describe trying to change another person's mind? Well, sometimes we may get it done, but the cost could be high. Anger and resentment can build when we play those games with others. What we have forced someone to do just doesn't work out well. Jesus permitted Judas to perform the worst act of betrayal in human history. And in the same way, I must accept the fact that I cannot control you. We cannot change the initial emotional reaction that sweeps across our body after an event occurs. Emotions arise when we perceive an event arousing almost instantly many physical changes in brain activities. The emotions of surprise, anger, love, disgust, sadness, and others happen in nanoseconds across our entire body, and we can't change that response. It's also true that we can't change the inevitability of death. Every one of the billions who have walked across our planet have faced their own moment with the dark valley of death. I will do the same, and so will you. Now, certainly, we want to do all we can to postpone that day by eating right and exercising and preventive medical care and having healthy emotions. But the day will certainly come when the words of Ecclesiastes are fulfilled, when, according to the ancient preacher, the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Death is inevitable, and one of several things that is unchangeable that we must face today. The four unchangeables I've just mentioned are with us every day. These unalterable realities go against the grain of our independent heart. It makes us frustrated. A few months ago, I totally disagreed with the choices made by leaders in my church. The board fired the pastor and associate pastor, claiming they failed to supervise an employee properly. I was shocked, appalled, and angry over what I perceived to be an injustice. I spoke out in an emergency meeting attended by hundreds. My wife and I actually stopped attending the worship service for months in protest. But the choice could not be changed. I struggled to practice this hard work of acceptance that I'm talking about today. I think we find in the Serenity Prayer something to keep us on track with acceptance. We know Reinhold Niebuhr lived through some of the most difficult periods in human history, opposing the Nazi regime, communism, unchecked capitalism, and racism. He certainly faced the unchangeables. So what did he propose to help us deal with a life like this, to make it better? His formula is in the prayer itself. God, grant me the grace to accept with serenity the things I cannot change. Acceptance is a life skill. It means the choice to live according to reality. When I accept a gift, I receive that item as a fact and I make it a part of my life. When I accept the charges for a purchase, it means that I confirm the reality of that monetary exchange. I often encourage my clients to practice acceptance as the willingness to take and hold what life offers without needless defense, even if this involves difficult or negative feelings. Acceptance does not seek to escape, deny, or avoid feelings. Instead, it acknowledges and embraces them as they are. For instance, when a loved one dies, we should accept the sadness and mixed feelings without condemning our reaction as being weak or something we should get over quickly. And the same thing can happen with these unchangeables that I mentioned. We should embrace them and live according to their reality. It just makes sense. It truly is a step towards life at its best. This acknowledgement opens the door to another phase of acceptance. We can practice diffusion, meaning disconnecting our interpretation of an event from our actions. For example, if I smash my thumb with a hammer, I can shout ouch and soak it in cold water. Or, in contrast, I can react angrily and throw the hammer across the room at my coworker. That dysfunctional connection is called fusion, meaning the entanglement of what I'm thinking and what I'm doing. Fusion tangles our behavior and thought patterns together in unreasonable ways. In another example, when Zeke ran a red light and got a ticket, he blamed Ursula. "You were telling me that stupid story about your mother and I couldn't concentrate." Zeke had fused his behavior of poor driving with his blame fixing on Ursula. How much better it would have been if he would have checked his irrational thoughts, connecting his behavior, and assumed responsibility for his actions. His diffusion, to separate the angry thought about the ticket from Ursula's conversation, would have moved him to act according to his best values, including a better mood and avoiding offending Ursula. It's encouraging to find that persons of faith have been on this same path like we are. We can learn from them to embrace acceptance as we meet the unchangeables of life. We accept the fact that we can't change the past, just as the Apostle Paul did with his friends in Philippi. He wrote, "Forgetting what is behind and straining to what is ahead, I press on toward the goal." And that's precisely the strategy we need as we think about the past. Paul's not advocating living in a state of amnesia, unable to recall the past. He's saying that the spiritual journey must not be hindered by the snares of those things behind us. In today's words, we have to just let go of it. We embrace today, turning away from the past and finding the new opportunities that we have. As we think about the choices of others, we also accept those. We can stop using so much effort to manipulate other people to do what we think is best. That's usually a sign we're caring about ourselves and our interests more than the other person. Remember when Paul wrote to the Romans about eating meat sacrificed to idols? It was a strange situation that we hardly understand, but two groups were accusing each other of sin over an ethical dilemma. His bottom line came in that book of Romans where he said, "Accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you." In many matters of life, I should accept what you choose, even though I may not agree. That's a crucial distinction. Acceptance is not approval or compromise of my conviction and yours. It's a recognition of our fellow human in all of her nuances and facets of living. When we practice acceptance, we give the other person grace and toleration. After all, they're probably working to tolerate me as well. Turning to another one of those unchangeables, we accept our emotional reactions as they are, without defense or judgment or denial. You and me are genuine human beings, and we will be provoked to anger, scared out of our wits, lust after bodily gratification, and be empty after a terrible loss. But these bodily reactions are only the first stage. You can choose how you will interpret and respond to each event. Remember, we can't change the initial reaction, but we can choose what we will do. When you feel sad, you can choose to retreat into bed or go out for a meditative stroll. And when you're angry, you can choose in a moment whether to scream at a mate or take a deep breath to consider your words. Accepting the power and reality of the feeling and channeling that with choice for constructive ends is using the mighty power of a crashing wave to surf it to the beach with a smile. We can choose our emotional reactions as we accept them and make the right choice. The final part is to make peace with our inevitable end in our earthly life. None of us will escape the world alive. To accept our mortality is not a fatalistic defeat, but a freedom to live in harmony with the cycles of every being in the universe. We can make each day meaningful as a gift that God has given and joyfully expect eternity to extend our pleasures with God. We can find Paul's dilemma kind of true for us, as he said, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain." For a believer, a person who is seeking after God, The inevitability of death is not a dark curtain that ends the show, but an intermission that brings a second and great act. We do this by living fully each day of our journey in acceptance for what we have. I said earlier that Niebuhr's original prayer had something a little bit different than the later popular versions, something that was left out. Listen again. Niebuhr prayed, "God, grant me the grace to accept with serenity the things I cannot change." God's grace was an important part of that original prayer. God's grace is the helping force that makes the way for our stubborn hearts to accept reality as it is. God is present with us in each moment, drawing us towards the best choice possible. We can choose to receive the grace of divine love that leads toward the best. Cooperating with God in this process to accept what we cannot change will certainly bring serenity even in the face of great challenges. Perhaps it would be good to pause and pray this entire prayer over a situation in our own lives today. So hear it one more time as we close. God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Tracks for the Journey. I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the episode, but I also hope that you'll take a moment to go to my website, tracksforthejourney.com, and subscribe to the weekly Tracks Express newsletter. On that website, you'll find many resources that will enable you to live with greater well-being. Join me again as we seek to walk the path of well-being in our journey of life.